Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Utahns Against Hunger's forum on food insecurity and veterans. My name is Neil Rickard. I'm the childhood nutrition advocate for Utahns Against Hunger, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. And I'm joined by Steve Prater and Emily Harrison, and I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves and talk a little about their work. Why don't we start with you, Steve?
Sure, thanks, Neil. I'm Steve Prater. I am the Food Security Program Coordinator at the Department of Veterans Affairs in Salt Lake City.
Great. And Emily?
Hello, I'm Emily Harrison. I'm the director for Blue Star Families of Utah, and we support military and veterans here in the state of Utah with various programs that really try to speak to the bigger challenges, lifestyle challenges that our military and veteran families experience.
Great. So obviously we're concerned about food insecurity on a lot of fronts. And one of the reasons that we've singled out veterans is not only because we have a major military presence here in Utah and a number of veterans, but also because we see just from the data here in the state and nationally that there are markedly higher rates of food insecurity among veterans relative to the general public. And it's a complicated topic. Generally, working with food insecurity, we already work with a lot of different programs. I know personally, I work a lot with school meals, but Utahns Against Hunger, we also work with WIC and SNAP, et cetera. But not only do those programs exist, at least in theory, for veterans, but veterans also have a number of specific services and resources available to them. And it can be kind of complicated navigating that. And certainly we hear accounts of there being gaps in between those services or difficulty navigating them. How do the two of you feel that the gaps in services available to veterans shape their experience of food insecurity? And what opportunities do you guys see in trying to bridge those gaps? Let's see, feel free to jump in. I'm not going to call on anybody.
Okay. I think gaps do exist. I think for a lot of veterans, there are a lot of services in the community. I think that there's various elements, right? I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. I think that a lot of veterans are independent and there's some embarrassment in maybe accessing services. But I think additionally, if a veteran is under a lot of stress, the number of services that's presented to them or the number of services in the community can be daunting. And they don't know in that moment when they're under a lot of stress, how do I access these services? And who do I talk to? Where do I go? You know, and I've heard that a lot from veterans that we deal with on a daily basis, that they're so stressed that, you know, they're worried about finances or they're worried about their mental health or they're worried about all these factors that trying to navigate food resources is just another layer of stuff that's really, really difficult. And so trying to bridge those gaps, I think, is important. Last year, the VA opened a food pantry on campus, and that's been an amazing journey so far. We haven't even been open a year, and last month we served 406 veterans in 1 month. So it's just incredible. But veterans hear about it, and they're coming out, and they're not just coming to get food. When they come there, we always ask them about other things that they might need, right? And so that way we're connecting to care in other areas. So.
I would definitely agree with Steve on that. And I think sometimes veterans don't always feel like there are programs that are made for them. A lot of times you hear a lot about all these programs that are available to the active duty population, but those programs don't always carry over after they've transitioned from their service. So I think sometimes there's a lot of frustration in the process of trying to locate services. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunities for organizations like myself and the VA and others in the community that work with veterans to do a lot more cross-talking. and have more comprehensive lists and access points for veterans to get the information about available programs. And there's really opportunities for like programs like SNAP and WIC, maybe to be in the places that our veterans are accessing services. So, have representatives that are at the VA or at VBA or at our vet centers, even Department of Workforce Services, places that veterans are already there receiving or attempting to receive services, and actually having a subject matter expert available, because there's a lot of misconceptions about these programs, and they often probably don't even know that they could potentially qualify for these programs. And I think that's an area that could probably use a lot of work.
Just to agree, I agree with Emily, and I would just add that's one of the tenets. When my position was created, I've only been in my new position since April, but when it was created, one of the reasons it was created was to facilitate those connections to care, to fill and bridge those gaps. And it's exactly what Emily's talking about. It's making sure that veterans make those connections and we can bridge the gaps. We want to bridge the gaps between food insecurity and housing, between housing and legal, between legal and medical, between homelessness and medical, and address as many of those as we can, because food insecurity doesn't happen in isolation, right? And so there's often other factors that attend it. So we want to address as many of those as we can and connect veterans to as many resources, not just within the VA, but with our community partners as well.
So I want to follow up on something that you said at the start of your answer, Steve, talking about pride as one of these barriers. And I mean, like, definitely having the options for screening services is a big recommendation. We saw it in a GAO report. But you guys have talked a lot about not just that, but a very in-depth, like, personal response that's involved in bridging those gaps. But for some people, and we know based on surveys, there was actually a study reported, released this month by the RAND Corporation, talking about factors involved in food insecurity and veterans. Veterans are less likely to participate in a lot of these programs, SNAP, WIC, school meals, and it's not necessarily an issue of access. It is an issue of willingness to opt in or seeing that program as desirable relative to other benefits programs that might exist. And I'm wondering, how are some ways to, like, grapple with that factor? I mean, if somebody says, I don't want this, it's very hard to argue with that, but, like, what are the ways that we could point out that this is a useful benefit or worth considering to people who are reluctant to try it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that as I'm working with veterans, I've run across veterans who will tell me things like, well, I don't need those services. I'm okay camping. The military taught me how to camp. Okay, the military taught you how to bivouac. They can teach you how to camp. And so, maybe addressing things, and this is a technique I've always used, is talking to veterans about, okay, so you're saying you're good camping, that's fine, but how's your health doing? Let's investigate those areas where you're actually struggling. How's your mental health? Do you feel like hurting yourself or anybody else? Kind of delving into some things where I want, as a clinician, because I'm a licensed clinical social worker, I want to lead them down a road that helps them see and understand that there are services that are available not just at the VA, but with our community partners as well, to help address some of these social determinants of health, because that's really ultimately what we're talking about. And how that we can be a resource in connecting them, not just to VA services, but to the services that are in the community. But it's a delicate conversation, right? Because veterans can be very independent. Veterans can be very, they can be, well, you can call it whatever you want, stubborn, resilient, independent, all of those things. And the military has kind of trained them to be that way, right? Through a lifetime of lessons. And so it's kind of coming alongside them, helping not to break down the barriers, but to lower them a little bit so that we can help them see that there are things we can connect them to, and whether it's food, whether it's, bringing a medical provider to see them. Not far from the VA here up in the mountains, there was a veteran living up there a couple of years ago, and our medical team went up there to see the veteran. The veteran was living in the community, and they provided medical care to the veteran right there. And so it's engaging people where they're at, but it's more so coming alongside them and helping them see where we can be of assistance. And I'm a veteran myself, so I will usually try and connect with a veteran vet to vet and help them kind of lower their barriers a little bit that way. So.
I think unfortunately, there's a good percentage of veteran families who had a negative experience attempting to access either SNAP or WIC while they were on active duty for various different reasons. There's a lot of challenges around that, especially with income qualification and what counts and what doesn't count. Does BAH count? Does child support count? Like all these different factors. And sometimes you can go into a particular, WIC office and talk to two different people and get two different answers about what qualifies and what doesn't. When I worked specifically with the active duty population, when I was embedded in active duty Army units doing social work, we saw a lot of that, or like they missed the income qualification by like $20 or something like really silly and kind of frustrating, for that family. So there's probably a lot of hesitance to attempt to do that again. Like it's kind of like an exercise of insanity, right? Like, why am I going to continue to keep trying to apply for something that I'm not gonna qualify for? And probably once they have transitioned from service, they probably don't understand that they even potentially would qualify. Even if their financial situation has changed. So I think it can be frustrating for some families. I know even if they did get access to services, sometimes there's just, I know it's been 21 years ago, but I had a very not so warm reception and participation in WIC. I lasted like all of 2 months before I was like, this is not for me, not for my family. We're not going to do this. I think there's that as well. Like Steve said, there's a lot of embarrassment factors that can go along with it. I know as a mother who's attempted to use WIC in the commissary myself and gets a cashier that doesn't know what they're doing, and suddenly the entire commissary knows that you're on WIC because somebody's yelling across the commissary that they don't know how to like process your WIC order. So there is a lot of that that can happen. But yeah, I think it's really, once they transition from service, it's really, I think, an education issue of getting the information to veterans, having it in the right places, having it really accessible, having really good information about the documents that they need and exactly what those income qualifiers are, what counts and doesn't count. I think that would be very helpful in getting more veterans into these types of programs.
So following on with what Emily was saying, Emily, you mentioned the SNAP benefits, and 2 weeks ago I was at a White House summit in Washington, and the Secretary of the USDA was there, the Secretary of the VA was there, and they signed a memorandum of agreement between the two agencies. And one of the things that they said was that, this is important for us to do because these two agencies haven't always worked together hand in hand as we should. And so Secretary Vilsack of the USDA made mention there that they understand these gaps that we're talking about in income and things, especially for veterans and active duty service members. But the one thing that Secretary Vilsack said was that they are looking at changing that within the next 6 months to make that a better process for active duty and veterans, and to make it a different process. So hopefully within the next 6 months or so, we'll see some changes in the SNAP in the application to it, and then also in the benefits and stuff.
And there's also a stigma that goes along with it, or a belief rather, and I'm not really sure where it comes from, but like this belief that somewhere, if you apply for SNAP or you apply for WIC, that is going to be like direct reported to your command, or reported to the VA, and like you would somehow like maybe lose your disability benefits because you're receiving some other type of assistance from the government. And these are obviously things that are not true, but that's, those are some of the beliefs that are out there and are definitely deterrents to people seeking assistance, whether they're on active duty or they've transitioned from service. So there's definitely work that can be done, especially with these MOUs and different things, and people from the top, in the DoD saying that, food insecurity is important, and that, it's something that we're working on, together as a community. So I think they were taking steps in the right direction for sure.
Emily, you mentioned something that I think is worth talking about, like specifically. There's in any conversation, at least in this context, talking about veterans, there's the obvious point of the transition from active service. And a lot of things that we associate with food insecurity are at least like hypothetically or implied to connect to that transition in some way, whether it's a change in like the health habits, or whether it's unemployment, or all of these things. But obviously every veteran's a different person, and that's going to be a very different process for everybody involved. I'm wondering if you guys could shed some light on some of the general trends, like how that can go for people, either positively or negatively, as they're grappling with just a backdrop of food insecurity.
I know for our family, because we just recently, my husband transitioned from active duty service. He retired in 2017, and I think we're still dealing with it. I mean, because it's like a PCS on crack. I mean, you're reestablishing your entire life all over again, most likely in a completely different place, or maybe going back to a home of record that you haven't lived in 20, 25 years, whatever it might be. So it was super challenging for us. We had really hard time deciding where we were gonna go, where we wanted to live, where we wanted, that forever home to be. It was not an easy decision, and we still question whether we made the right decision. Our kids had quite a culture shock coming to Utah. All of my children were born and raised in Hawaii, and we came here very, very different cultures, and it was hard on all of us, but especially on our children. But for my husband specifically, like his transition was not easy. We went from me being that person that had to do everything, all the financial aspects, and taking the kids to doctor's appointments and doing all those things because he was on active duty, to he has to do these things now, he has to participate. And then also just from a job perspective, he just wanted to be retired, didn't want to work. But the reality of that is you can't buy a home if you are not employed. Even though we had retirement income and disability pay, if you didn't have an actual job, we weren't getting, approved for a mortgage to buy a home. So he had to get a job, and that was frustrating for him. a lot of kind of imposter syndrome kind of took effect, even though he was retired as a first sergeant, was a leader of soldiers for many, many years. He just didn't feel like he had any skills that translated to the civilian sector. So he ended up taking an entry level job that was like barely minimum wage or barely above minimum wage, just so that he had a job. And it was like, well, you know that like that's not going to work for you, right? Like that's not going to last very long. He had a ton of challenges with coworkers and HR, and lots of difficult conversations around how he can't speak to his employees and other civilians the way that he would talk to his soldiers. So it's just there's just a lot, and so I think the whole family feels the weight of all of those stressors. It's not just a veteran; it's the entire family. And then when you like for us, our family, when you go from even though it was a high cost of living area, we were getting COLA to here in Utah, to different jobs where we weren't making anywhere near as much money as we were when he was on active duty. And like everything in your lifestyle has to change, the way you budget and the way you shop and the way you can even go out to dinner and entertainment and all those things. So it can be a rough couple of years really dealing with those things. And I think if you're having other issues, maybe your marriage is not in the best place, or you can't find a job, you can't keep a job, like all of these things are going to whittle away at self-esteem and self-worth, and overall mental health, not just for that veteran, but the entire family. So if there's any financial issues at all, going through that process in changes of income in different areas, costs of living, trying to find a new place to live, insecurity is going to be, it's going to be there. It's really, unless you retired at a very high rank and you're very comfortable in your lifestyle, you're probably going to have some financial challenges. So it can be rough. I'm sure Steve speaks to this as well, probably better than I can.
I think it's great, Emily, because I think you and I bring a lot of different perspectives to this. My wife went through some of the exact same things that you're mentioning. So this is a conversation that she and I have had multiple times since I retired. And the transition to civilian life, because that's what they call it, is a major life change, not just for the veteran, but for the whole family as a system. And so for the veteran, there is a sense of grief and loss. If you've been doing that job for 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years, that's a long time to be doing something. And typically when a service member starts out in the military, they're given gradual responsibility and ownership that develops over time. So they have resources, they have people, they have equipment that they're in charge of. And it's a lot of responsibility. Well, to transition from that to civilian life, where you're what a military person would term a worker bee, is really hard, because suddenly you're not in charge of all those things. You're just doing the same mundane work that everybody else is doing. And in addition to that, the structure within the civilian workplace is not like the military. And what it takes to get to the next step or the next whatever is not defined. And so that's a source of confusion and frustration for a lot of service members. And that's part of the grief and loss that they go through. And and I think that some veterans that we see at the VA, some veterans get into this habit of job hopping. That's what we call it. Where a veteran gets out, they can't find that structure, they can't find where they fit. So they leave that job and jump to another, and then they jump to another, then they jump to another, because they're searching for that sense of belonging. And some veterans get out of the service and go to law enforcement. that provides a sense of structure, and a lot of them like that. But a lot of them that we meet, struggle not only on the family side because they're unsettled, but then also on the job side because they can't find where they fit. And so those are some of the challenges I think that veterans have in adjusting to civilian careers.
So I think a lot of there are kind of two pieces to what I'm hearing. One is the piece that both of you talked about at various points, where there are lots of little stresses that build up, like that this is a new detail that you have to manage, or it's another challenge that's on your plate, or et cetera. And then the bigger picture challenges with like a sense of purpose or direction that come with the change to civilian life. One of the things that we see a lot of the time with food insecurity and a lot of these issues is, well, you've got a lot of stresses happening. You've got housing pressure, you've got medical debts, et cetera, and maybe you're doing okay until one thing happens and suddenly you're not. And it seems like all of this front, the shift to civilian life, is just another front where something can go wrong. With that in mind, I'm curious about like revisiting this conversation about mental health services. I mean, it's like definitely when a lot of people think about mental health, they think about one big dramatic issue, but there's a lot of basically maintenance work that could be really beneficial to people that seems very appropriate to this issue. And I'm wondering how well that's being addressed, like what could be done to address that better.
Yeah, I've given a lot of thought to this, and I think that problems rarely happen in isolation. And when a veteran gets out of service, they struggle with a lot of things. And there was a study, I think, from the Pew Research Center that talked about, what indicators indicate that a veteran will have a harder time transitioning to civilian life. And so some of the things that they found were trauma, whether it's PTSD or a TBI or an amputation or some kind of severe traumatic injury. And if they've witnessed combat operations, those are some of the things that indicate that transitioning to civilian life would be a lot harder than they would have thought otherwise. And those things oftentimes can come with depression. Depression is a pervasive thing if it's not treated, because depression happens in layers, right? So let's say, just as a hypothetical, a veteran's isolating because they can't find where they fit in the world now. They're without sufficient income. Their phone gets cut off. The landlord threatens to evict them. And now they're out of food. All those things are layers, and layers of significant problems, and significantly impact not just the veteran but the family system. And that stress creates this cycle of depression that goes round and round and round, and often, unfortunately, can lead to suicide among veterans, which the VA and our community partners are taking very seriously, and trying to mitigate the best we can. But suicide's hard to predict, and mental health problems are hard to predict. And we just encourage everybody to seek help. It takes, before you retired from the Army, there was a campaign that was out there, and it was talking about it takes the strength of a warrior to seek help. And when I was in the Army, that seemed a little cheesy, but on this side of retirement and where I work now, that's really an important concept. It's not the cheesy thing that I thought it was, and it does take a lot of strength and overcoming embarrassment and other things. Even though the depression's not their fault, veterans often feel like it is, and they internalize things. So, making sure that services are available and we're addressing things straightforward and upfront. That's why we ask, and we're not shy. Emily can attest to this. We're not shy as clinicians about asking veterans, Do you feel like hurting yourself? Do you feel like committing suicide? Have you contemplated suicide in the last 2 weeks? You know, we will ask those questions because we want to help the veterans of this.
And just to dovetail off of that, I think there's some challenges to that, even like with the increased screenings at different access points, you know, in the VA or just even in the civilian medical world. I think as a service member, when you're on active duty, you are conditioned to answer those questions in a way that is not going to alert any suspicion to, you know, them or your command that there could potentially be a problem, because it's just something that you don't want to deal with. You don't want your command to know. And so I feel like a lot of times that is going to carry over to their veteran life. It's just kind of the way it is. My husband will tell you, like, how many drinks a week do you drink normally? Oh, 0. Just because that's the answer that you think that they want to hear, right? So I think that even though we're increasing those screenings, there can be challenges with that, and getting veterans to really open up and answer those truthfully, in an environment where they feel like it's safe, you know, to ask for help. So I think there's also a lot of challenges around access to mental health care right now, or perceived access to mental health care. I think there's like a perception that it's not available. There are long waits, and I think it can be difficult to know, like, what that true wait time is, what the reality actually is for people. I think, but even outside of the VA, if they just have TRICARE, TRICARE makes it really easy in that you don't have to have a referral. And essentially, you can go wherever you want for mental health care, but there has to be places to go, and there has to be availability and providers that are accepting new patients. It's a really big challenge from what we're hearing here in Utah, just personally, with my children. Attempting to access services has been difficult, and there are waits. I have been told personally waits up to 6 months or more for a provider. For those people who are like really in it and struggling and need help emergently, it's really difficult to find that care. And I mean, really, at that point, you're limited to crisis lines and helplines to try to maybe triage situations that are probably far more serious than a crisis line call. So I'm sure that there's a lot of frustration around that from veterans. And then it can also be expensive if either that veteran doesn't have access for whatever reason to the VA, or isn't authorized to use the VA, and they're trying to navigate these services in the civilian community. Even if they have TRICARE or Prime retired, they're still paying out of pocket $33 a visit or whatever it is these days. So if you're also experiencing financial challenges and you're having a hard time putting food on the table, like what are you going to, I'm so sorry, like, what are you going to prioritize? You're going to prioritize your mental health, or you're going to prioritize putting food on the table? So
kind of goes back to layers, you know, that we were talking about, you know, where everything's layered. And if you're in a civilian job that you've taken that you don't like, and things aren't going the way you would like them to, and you don't have enough money to take care of your family, and now you're out of food, and next month you could be out of a home, you know, it's just layer.
Burping.
So there's another layer that I think has been touched on a couple of times that I wanted to bring up, and that's disability specifically. So like physical disability through injury, And obviously you can get that like in any profession, you can get that as an issue, like coming up with if you're trying to like pursue benefits, period. But having like a veteran status is another dimension of it, especially given that the injury, the circumstances of your disability might be unusual for whoever you're trying to work with. There might be details that are weird. Like, what are some of these challenges that people don't realize exist for veterans seeking services?
That's a really good question, and the question about disabilities is probably more significant than people realize. And I probably didn't even realize it as much until I'm in my current role. You know, I know of a veteran that, you know, is basically kind of homebound, you know, has seizures and stuff and can't get out, and doesn't have transportation because of their condition. And so, you know, how does that person get not only to see the doctor, but how do they go get out to go shopping if they don't have some kind of support system? Again, it's another layer, like you were talking about, Neil, where that not only do you have depression, but you know, you don't have transportation, you're isolated in a rural community because it's too expensive to live in a bigger city. And so it's another layer that your disability seems like it's holding you back, right? There's a rock band, an alternative rock band called the X Ambassadors, and they sing a song called Renegades. And the thing I like about that song is it's written about people with disabilities. And in fact, the singer, the main singer of the group, his brother plays the keyboard. His brother's blind. And so it's really powerful. And so there's power, there can be power in disabilities, but it's finding out what supports people need and how we can connect them to those supports so that they're not debilitated by their disability. And sometimes veterans can fall into that, where they take on the identity of their disability and, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that because of it. But I feel like it's our job, not just mine, but our community partners and stuff, to help them see other possibilities. I was catastrophically injured when I was in the military, and so, you know, it's a miracle that I'm here today. But it took somebody else to help me see that there were possibilities beyond the disability. And our disabilities don't define who we are. You know, what defines who we are is what we do today. And so getting up and going to physical therapy or going to whatever it is that's going to help us gain some empowerment. There's power in that. And you know, it takes the strength of the warrior to look at that and come up with a battle. And if I could talk to veterans and stuff, they've all been trained how to come up with a battle plan, and that's what you need. So.
I think Steve kind of spoke to that support system. Unfortunately, not all of our veterans have access to a caregiver or a full-time caregiver that can help them navigate, you know, those everyday challenges. And see that a lot when we spend time in the VA in the lobby giving out resources, or we're there for a special event, and you'll see veterans that are sitting there waiting for transportation or sitting there waiting for somebody to come pick them up, and they'll be there for hours waiting because maybe they have a loved one that can pick them up, but they're at work and they can't get to them until lunch or when they're done with their shift or whatever it is, or they're waiting for a very specific bus or some kind of transportation. So those are the more challenging days, and I think Steve would agree, when like you just really wish that we had so many more services that we could provide to these veterans so that they can get to the places that they need to go. And I think it's the same thing with this scenario, as far as if you have transportation challenges, you're going to prioritize, you know, when you have transportation, what you're going to do with it. And so you're probably going to prioritize going to medical appointments or going to work, if you're able to work. So it's definitely it can be sad when you see the number of veterans who truly just don't have a support system.
I think too, just in addition to what Emily was saying, I think that there's a triad of problems when we are looking at, food insecurity, and that is you have food insecurity as one problem, you have transportation as another problem, and then you have income as the third. And so that creates this triad of problems. If you add disability in there, disability is usually impacted by transportation because they can't get to the store, they can't get to appointments or whatever. And if they don't have the resources, they can't pay for the transportation. Or, if they don't have the resources, they can't pay for the reduced fare card or whatever it is. So it's that really triad of food insecurity, transportation, and income is this really pervasive little triad that keeps a lot of our veterans, really holds them back, right? I knew a veteran not too long ago who was talking about, he had to make a choice either paying his rent or buying food or buying gas. And so the veteran chose to pay the rent and would eat like 2 spoonfuls or 3 spoonfuls of peanut butter in the morning as his breakfast. Well, that's not healthy any way you cut it, right? And so we were able to help that person get some food, and we're working on helping them get connected to other resources because that's not sustainable. Eventually, you get into this cycle where you get behind, and suddenly you're behind on rent or whatever it is, and I think that little triad, a lot of this goes back to that little triad: food insecurity, income, and there's other things, but I think that little triad is really a cog in the wheel. So.
It's very true. And I think they also become very socially isolated because of these transportation issues, and they're probably not aware of just even maybe basic services that are available in their community. Maybe like Meals on Wheels, for instance, if that's something that they can utilize. They probably don't know that it exists, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to forward thinking on like our local food banks in not necessarily having mobile food trucks that go out, which we have, but actually having like delivery programs for veterans or any elderly who would classify themselves as shut-ins, so that they can get just regular food. I don't know that not all of our veterans are aging veterans. We have younger veterans that probably don't qualify for Meals on Wheels, but would appreciate a food box being delivered to them on a regular basis. I think that would be kind of life-changing for a lot of people who are having challenges. So it's something that I would definitely love to see be available more as an option for folks with these disabilities and transportation issues.
That's one of the things that the National VA Office of Food Insecurity is looking at. They were just established last fall, but they're already looking at initiatives for next year in terms of the very things that you're talking about, Emily, about being able to provide more food to veterans, especially those who are, for whatever reason, regardless of disability, isolated in home or stuck at home for whatever reason, and being able to try and get food to them, either through the VA itself or through somehow grants to the community. And so I think in the next year, we'll see some big initiatives coming out of the VA National Office of Food Security.
So this has been a really great conversation so far. I'm going to close it up with one final question, sort of a catch-all. Like, one of the things that I've seen repeatedly as I was researching questions for the forum, et cetera, a refrain that the makeup of the armed forces has been changing for like the last several decades. Part of that has been like demographic shifts in the military, and obviously the makeup among veterans has changed a lot over the last couple of years. It's been very eventful few decades, and I'm wondering if like all of these differences, all of these shifts have introduced any more wrinkles. We've talked a lot about so many different layers of issues that can be addressed as a part of like grappling with food insecurity, as a part of grappling issues with the issues of veterans more generally. And I'm wondering if you guys had any thoughts as to other things that have been left out so far.
I joined the military in 1989, and then I served till 2010. And Neil, I can't tell you how the military changed during that period of time. I'm sure Emily and her husband saw just as many changes as I did. It was pretty profound. But one thing that I noticed when I first joined the military, I joined in the infantry, and there weren't obviously women in the infantry at that time. But one of the interesting statistics is that if you consider for a minute that in Vietnam, or during the Vietnam War, there were about 265 women serving in the military. And there were about 11,000 that actually served in Vietnam. As of 2021, there are more than 400,000 women serving in the military, and that there are more than about 300,000 women that actually served in Iraq and Afghanistan since 9/11. So those are profound shifts, right? And so it kind of makes not only the military, but the VA, because the VA is the one that provides the aftercare, it makes us look at those numbers and go, my goodness, what are we providing? You know, nowadays, the VA provides a women's health. We have a women's clinic. We have services specifically tailored, not just to women, but we have an LGBTQ clinic, that specifically treats that population. And so I think changes that we're talking about, I think that those have come about over time. And with societal changes, with more women being in the military, with more minorities of all kinds being in the military, I think that creates a larger diversity, and it makes the military and the VA change, able to take care of veterans, not only us, but our community partners. And the way we do that is through providing services that are needed and meeting people.
I think for me, I started my career actually being embedded in active duty Army units. Very, like Steve said, like I, even in 2002, 2003, through the early 2000s, I was in units where I was the only female in that unit. So it's a good shift to see that shift. But I think for some service members who are still in, it's still kind of a new concept for them, depending upon what type of unit they're in the military. But just from my work on the active duty side, we used to see like a finite number of problems. You had single soldier issues and you had young family issues. And then when I came to Utah, I moved over to the Army Reserve side, and it was like a whole different world. For the first time ever, I had that, young 17-year-old pre-basic soldier, and then a 72-year-old still in the reserve officer, who has grandkids and great grandchildren. Like that's not something that I ever had experienced before. So there's like a whole just depth of issues, family challenges, and situations that you come across when you look at a guard and a reserve population versus an active duty population. So I think we have veterans or people that are transitioning, service members that are transitioning from service at all different ages. They could be 20 something, 30 something, but then they could also be 60 and 70 years old by the time they leave service. So it's two very different ends of the spectrum as far as providing like what that transition looks like for them when they leave service, and then the types of services that they need when they get out of service. So um, I feel like I'm in no way a subject matter expert when it comes to a lot of things, and I feel like whenever you think like you've seen it all, something will come along and show you that that you have not you've not seen it all. So it's definitely, I think that that can create in and of itself can create a challenge for places like the VA and also and certainly my organization for like there's no cookie cutter approach to uh, providing care and service to families. So it's we're constantly learning, I feel like. So always something new.
Yeah, very, very much so, it seems. So once again, thank you guys for joining us. So again, it's Steve Prater and Emily Harrison. I guess before we head off, is there anything you guys want to plug or announce, programs going on or anything? It's all right if not, but just want to give a chance.
I would just throw a plug out there for our Veterans Food Pantry here on the main VA campus. You know, we're not like maybe other food pantries in the community who serve veterans, and a veteran must be eligible for VA health care in order to get food. But outside of that, there aren't income limits or any of those restrictions. Um, and if somebody wants to donate, we're always taking donations at our food pantry. It's a little tough right at the moment because there's a lot of construction on our campus. But it's a great program. It's not just about giving out food, it's about access to care. And that's the way we structure it. So that's kind of where I do it.
I think from my perspective, with Blue Star Families, a lot of what we do is information and referral besides the programs that we offer. And despite our name, Blue Star Families, we're open to everybody. They don't even need to be military or veteran connected. We open our membership up to everybody. Our membership is free. All of our programs are always free. But you don't have to have a family to be in Blue Star Families. You're part of our military family, our veteran family, our community. So reach out, participate, check out our programs. But just when it comes to anyone out there who is struggling in any capacity, it is hard to ask for help, and it takes a lot of strength to ask for help. But there is no problem that is harder to solve than one that you have let go until the absolute extreme last moment where you're being evicted from your home or you're getting your vehicle repossessed or like whatever it is. All of those problems can be potentially avoided or a solution found if you get to us, one of us, whether it's Steve, myself, or somebody from any other organization, when that problem is fresh and new. So please just reach out for help. Don't that's what we're here for. That's why we exist, is because this is the work that we do. So there's not a lot that Steve and I probably haven't seen, like I've already said, but there's no reason to be embarrassed or feel like you are less than for trying to solve a problem in your life. So definitely reach out soon, and just reach out to whoever that is, whether it's a friend, a neighbor, somebody in an organization, or the VA. Just reach out for help.
Great. So this was our forum on food insecurity and veterans. To everybody watching, thank you, and hope you have a nice evening.